Hi, I'm Mayor Jay Tibshraeny, and welcome to this edition of Chandler Inside Now. Today, it's my pleasure to have in studio Congressman Andy Biggs. Appreciate you being here, Congressman. Which district are you a congressman of?
CD5.
CD5, which includes Chandler and a lot of the East Valley. But thanks for being here. And we're going to jump into talking about some of the things that are going on in Washington, D.C. these days, a lot of high-profile things. But I thought before we did that, for those in the audience that don't know you as well as I know you, maybe a little bit about you, about your background. You served in the House, State Senate President. Yeah. So maybe some of that background would be helpful for some of our folks.
Happy to talk about that. That's probably the easiest question you're going to give me all day, but
probably.
But it's good to be with you, Mayor, and Mayor Tibshraeny and I go back, served in the legislature together, and that's great. I'm an Arizona native. I was born in Tucson, and my law degree's from U of A, and I have a master's degree from ASU. That way,
very smart.
Yeah, and my wife and I have been married 36 years. We have 6 children and 4 grandchildren, and you know, I've written a couple books. I do some music, and I've practiced law for a number of years as well.
Right.
Yeah.
And you kind of decided to do a little public service, and you ran for the State House back in the early 2000s?
2002, I ran and was elected for the first time, and then served in the State House for 8 years, and then the Senate for 6, and the last 4 as the Senate President. Yeah. And before that, I did international policy work at multilateral institutions around the world as well. So I love policy making, which, you know, as a kid, you never grow up thinking, man, when I grow up, I want to be a policy maker.
Yeah, you're right.
Yeah, so
that's good. Well, good. You got a really good background, and I've worked with you at the legislature. We worked on many things together. We had some pretty good years there.
We did.
But you decided a couple of years ago, 2 years ago, you threw your hat in the ring to run for Congress. You got elected to Congress, and so now you're in your, I guess it's the second?
Well, first term, 10th month.
First term, you're getting close.
Yeah, I'm 10 months into it, Mayor. And
you guys have had a lot of issues and a lot of high profile. Of course, part of it comes with you have a new president.
Yes.
And who's high profile and involved with a lot of things. So I thought maybe we could talk a little bit about something. We had a lot of natural disasters this past summer, a couple of significant hurricanes, the one in Houston and then the one in Miami. But I wanted to chat with you a little bit about the Houston disaster and the hurricane. Yeah. There was a relief bill that came through.
Sure.
You had some concerns with that relief bill because of some things that were in it, but I thought maybe you could explain that. You ended up voting against the bill, a few of you did, but there was reasons, and I wanted to just maybe explore that a bit.
Fair question. So what you need to understand is this was it started out as a $7.5 billion relief package for the Harvey victims in Houston, which they were devastated. And they need some relief. What has happened in the past, though, is the federal government, when we've passed these bills, we've found a pay for. We've said, you know, we have $20 trillion debt. Mm-hmm. If we're going to reallocate some money, let's reallocate some money for those disaster victims. We didn't do that this time. We just said, we're going to spend this money. And then oddly enough, Mr. Mayor, about an hour before we went to the floor, I got a call from my staff saying, they've just added another bill to the Harvey relief bill. And that bill was a foreign aid bill. Mm-hmm. And I thought, well, that's odd. And so I asked a member of leadership on the floor, I said, is there a reason we're doing this? He said, well, we're not really doing that. He used a term, he described it, but the way you and I would think of it as an Arizona legislative term is to strike everything. Wow. He said, this is simply to strike everything. And I said, well, we just talked to your office and they said the whole bill is in here. And he said, really? I'll go, yeah, this is the way things work sometimes in Congress. So he said, I'm going to go check it out. And he came back and he said, yeah, he said, we've added this bill to it.
Right.
And what I found out is basically I was the only one in Congress, and I real quick read that bill, by the way.
Right.
It was 20 pages, and I real quick read it. My office was essentially the only office in Congress that had read that bill and saw that these were together. A funny story about that is the next day a guy said to me, said, you voted against a clean Harvey bill. And I said, well, it wasn't clean. He said, what do you mean it wasn't clean? And so I went through the story and said they added that into it.
Right.
And by the time it got back from the Senate, by the way, they added a whole lot of things to it and doubled the funding, again, without paying for it. This guy said to me, what do you mean it wasn't clean? And I told him the same story I just told you. He said, I can't believe it. And I said, well, go back and talk to your staff, and they'll tell you that it's true, and,
Right.
and indeed it was true.
Wow.
And that's the problem with Congress. Sometimes they will take something that they know that we all really want to do,
Right.
and they'll add something to it that is unnecessary. And in this instance, the people who had been wanting to get the READ Act, it's called the READ Act,
Right.
they wanted to get the READ Act in place for literally a long, long time, a number of years. After that passed, they were able to go out and say, we know the READ Act has been
That's the
enacted.
Foreign Aid.
That's the Foreign Aid Act, yeah.
Yeah, and you were okay with the relief as is, as long as they said, okay, we're going to use this much money for
Yeah.
relief, and then we're going to take it from here.
Absolutely. I mean, we were talking about
Yeah.
people in some very dire circumstances, and we just need to make sure that we're paying for it because we are $750 billion in the hole this fiscal year, and we really need to say if we're going to pay for it, let's just not just keep adding to the debt. Let's say it is worth it enough for us to do it, to maybe, and believe me, in a $4.1
Right.
trillion budget, you should be able to find the $7 billion that you're talking about.
I agree.
Yeah.
We're going to talk about some other stuff, but since you brought up the debt, we got the national debt, which is in the trillions, I guess, and then you got the every year's budget, which is upside down. Do you see any progress being made there, maybe to get back to a balanced budget? I think it was done during the Clinton years.
Yeah.
And what do you see happening there?
Well, the last time we had a balanced budget was for 3 years in a row under President Clinton.
Right.
And since then, they've never really passed a budget that balanced or passed a budget in many respects. So this year, the House passed the appropriations bills. It's going to go over to the Senate, and the Senate will consider those. The problem that you have is just there's an insatiable appetite to keep spending money that you don't have. And so, like on the continuing resolution, which basically just says we're going to keep funding government at the current level with some
Right.
bump ups, I proposed that we actually traject downward in our spending. So it would be a percentage. So if the economy grew, you actually wouldn't have necessarily a real cut, but you would have a ratio cut, which would generally start bringing us toward balance. And they ruled my amendment out of order, just so you know, the budget.
It'll happen.
Yeah. So yeah, there are many people who want to get to this. We've had national security leaders come and testify before Congress that our number one threat nationally is not North Korea or Iran. It is really the fact that we have 105% debt to GDP ratio, and if that keeps going up as we have natural disasters or military issues that we have to deal with, we won't have the money to pay for those.
It's unsustainable.
It's unsustainable.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean,
You don't operate that way
No.
in Chandler.
we couldn't, and we didn't at the state, or
Right.
we can't in our own houses, or we would all be declaring bankruptcy.
Exactly. And in fact, if you were a creditor of the United States, you'd probably take us into a forced bankruptcy because
Yeah.
you don't know if you're going to get paid back or not.
Yeah, so good. I appreciate that. Want to talk a little bit about the Obamacare stuff. Obamacare has been on the radar for a long time, but with the new Congress and the new president, it's kind of been in the news pretty regularly since April or March or what have you. You guys had a couple of bills. The one bill ended up getting out of the House, couldn't get out of the Senate. And then more recently, we've had the Graham-Cassidy thing, which appears to be dead. But maybe let's kind of dissect where we're at on Obamacare and changes, repeal, or whatever's going to happen with Obamacare.
Yeah, Mayor, I'm glad you brought it up because there are two things that I get asked about more than anything else. Obamacare and tax reform. I get all the time.
We're going to talk about that
Yeah,
too.
I bet we are. So with regard to the Obamacare issue, there are two things that are happening now that leads me to believe that there is still a glimmer of light that something might happen to adjust that. First of all, within the House, there is a discharge petition to bring the 2015 bill back to the floor of the House.
That's the one that ended up getting vetoed.
Yes, exactly. It passed unanimously in the House and Senate by the Republicans, so it had sufficient votes to get up to the president's desk. He vetoed it. There's a discharge petition. I've signed on to that petition. I think we should at least consider that bill again.
And when you say discharge petition, what translate that?
Oh, excellent. Yeah, sorry. So what happens is a bill gets introduced, it gets assigned to a bunch of committees, in this instance, 8 committees. And so if you want to bypass those committees and bring it to a vote on the floor, so members of the House can actually vote on this thing,
right?
You file, there's a procedure called a discharge petition.
Okay.
So you can file this petition, you get enough people to sign on to it. The rules require that you get a vote on the floor.
Okay.
And that's where we are in that. So that's out there. The other thing is we're going to pass, the time apparently expired in the Senate probably as of yesterday, if I'm not mistaken. So we're doing another budget probably next week. It will be out of balance, but it's a budget, and that will allow us to trigger some mechanisms to reconsider modification of Obamacare and the tax reform. It's being done ostensibly for the tax reform, but I believe you're going to see what we call instructions. And those instructions are going to come out and say, these committees shall consider the tax reform, these committees shall consider Obamacare issues. And so you should see that, and I think that's going to happen. So I guess my point is I'm still modestly hopeful that we can get something done on Obamacare. I mean, we have so many people who are in desperate need of relief from really high premiums. We're in Arizona where, you get one, if you're on the exchange, you give one insurer that provides. And that's really not a good thing for people.
Is it financially capable of sustaining itself right now? I mean, that's one of the arguments I hear why it needs to be rejuvenated, repealed, or what have you, is because in its current form, it's not financially sustainable for the federal government.
That's right. I mean, you are going to run out of money to fund that, and it's going to eat away. And that the subsidies that come with Obamacare and the exchanges, that is a real massive problem. And so, yeah, that's right. It's unsustainable.
We'll be right back. I'm going to reintroduce the show, and then we'll get back. I'm Mayor Jay Tibshraeny. You're watching Chandler Inside and Out, in studio with Congressman Andy Biggs. Again, welcome for being here today.
Glad to be with you, Mr. Mayor.
So the last chapter hasn't been written on what the dialogue will be on Obamacare, where it's going to go. There's going to be some more efforts. We'll just have to see. The latest one that was recently was the Graham-Cassidy thing. Was it very much different than what had been voted down a couple months earlier?
It was significantly different, and we didn't even have all the economic answers to questions like, are we saving money? Who stays on? Who can get help? What goes forward? But it was significantly different because there's money being block granted to the states.
Right.
And for a period of 5 years. The real issue became at one point is, well, what does that mean when it's block granted? Do they still have the same regulations and mandates that Obamacare required? Or do they have more leeway to do what they think is best in their respective states? But you also got rid of the individual and business mandates,
right,
and employer mandates. And by getting rid of those, it was a real hodgepodge. Nobody could tell. I mean, they'd say this will cause premiums to drop, and others would say, but this part causes them to go up, and so there was a lot more to learn about that.
So we'll keep an eye on that.
Yeah, me too.
So let's roll into tax reform. That's obviously always major issue. Current president's unveiled some partial plans, general plans, I guess I would call them, because there wasn't a lot of specific.
Right.
But where do you see tax reform kind of going with this Congress? Or what would you like to see too, also?
Yeah, well, what I would like to see is, and I've actually kind of put together, and you know me from
Right.
legislature, I've kind of put together my own bill in case,
Yeah.
just in case we need to use. Yeah, I have a bill that's available if anybody wants it. But I think what you're going to see is on the corporate side, a reduction to 20% rate. Now, the reason to think about that is currently our 35% rate is the highest in the industrialized world. I would have preferred a 15% rate, and if you had to move up, end up at 20. I have no idea where it'll end up, but right now I'm told it will not budge off 20. I don't know what to believe anymore, but it's going to be 20. Small businesses would move from 35 or 39, depending on how they're taxed now, to 25%. You would have 5 years of what we call immediate expensing. So what that means is if you buy equipment, you could immediately expense it. And that would be essentially a pilot program of
Right.
5 years for that. And then, you've got $2.5 trillion parked overseas.
Right.
And if you brought even half of that back, you'd have an immediate economic boost to this country. And so that's going to go to a 0% rate there to bring that money back to this country.
So if they'll repatriate those dollars back here, there'd be 0%,
Right.
and then they would make a commitment, I guess, to continue to bring their revenues back or their money back into the country.
After that, it'll be a territorial-based tax package, and which is what most countries do, quite frankly. And that way, by moving this, the idea is to stimulate the economy, number one, create jobs, and you really want them to keep the jobs in this country instead of outsourcing them elsewhere.
Right.
And so you want to make sure that our rates are lowest here and going forward. And I'll tell you, I talked to a couple of very large corporations, and I asked them, tell me what the impact would be for you. And between the two, they had $160 billion parked overseas. They said the day this was enacted, we'll bring every dime back to the United States.
And they'll reinvest it into this country in different ways and what have you.
Right. You'll see capital expenditure. You'll see probably expansion of facilities, equipment purchases. This is a good thing for the economy.
What would the stumbling block? Who would not like that? Would it be the group that wants to maybe tax a little bit on what you bring in here, or what would stop that from happening?
Well, the big issue that people are raising right now is they want it revenue neutral. So are you foregoing a tax? So right now the tax would be 35%. So if you have $2.5 trillion and you brought it all back, you'd get 35%. But the problem is they're not going to bring it back at 35%. No. And so this becomes a real debate as well.
Right.
And then on the individual side, we're going to collapse it to 3 brackets, with the highest being 35%. And we're going to have a low 0% bracket, and we're going to increase the standard deduction
right.
up to $24,000.
Right.
So
that's doubling it almost.
That's doubling it, yeah.
Right.
So if you make less than $24,000, you're not going to pay taxes. And then you're going to be taxed on what is above $24,000, which is
right.
a good thing. And the other thing, we're going to eliminate we're going to simplify, we're going to eliminate a lot of deductions, a lot of exemptions, a lot of loopholes that are out there to make it very simple. I should have brought, I actually have a prototype of the postcard, and we think about 93 to 95% of Americans will be able to fill out their taxes on a postcard.
That's pretty good.
That's good. And so now the process, which we haven't gotten into, because that's where the issue is, and is the Ways and Means Committee in the House and the Finance Committee in the Senate are actually writing their draft of the legislation.
Their own ideas?
Well, no, they're taking these ideas
from the president and putting them into each separately doing their own bill?
No, they're going to put it in a unique bill that's jointly written.
Oh, okay.
See, the way this has been different than the healthcare deal is that you've had participants from the administration, participants from the Senate and the House all together to create the framework that's out there right now.
Right.
And that makes it a little bit easier. But I mean, we're still waiting to see details and the way that works. But we think that in the end, the goal is that every American will have a reduction in their tax rate and easing of the burdens that they've been carrying.
So is the plan, from what you understand, to get it all done before the first of the year, or is that the timetable?
Well, my feeling is you have to get it done before the November break, which is the Thanksgiving recess.
Mm-hmm.
So we're looking at a time here where the House needs to get it done before the October recess. So you're going to have about 3 weeks to get it done, and then we get it to the Senate. They'll need to get it done in probably, we need to be working in tandem because the goal is by that November recess. Because if you get it done by the November recess, we'll be able to make it retroactive to January 1 of this year, which is what we want.
Right.
Because that would provide a stimulus. There are a couple of things that provide immediate stimulus. The repatriation of money, because that's new money to the economy.
Yeah.
And the other one is if you eliminate or reduce the capital gains. For nearly 80 years, whenever we've reduced the capital gains tax, you have seen an immediate economic boost in the economy. And that brings revenue into the tax funds as well. But the key is you stimulate the economy, you create more jobs, cause an expansion of the economy. When we've raised capital gains, on the other hand, that tax rate, we've always seen a contraction of the economy. And this is pretty empirical, and so the idea is now to deal with those two issues as well.
Well, we'll keep an eye on that one.
Yeah.
It's, that's a major undertaking, but it would be the most significant type of tax reform, probably in 30 years, I would think.
Since 1986.
Yeah, okay.
Exactly.
Okay, I want to talk briefly, we got about 5 or 6 minutes left, about Trump had talked a lot about infrastructure. You talked a lot about infrastructure when you were here in the state.
Yeah.
You were actually, you were like chairman of the transportation committee for the House, State House for a while.
For 6 years, yeah.
So, I mean, again, all this stuff costs money. And we talked earlier about we've got this deficit and debt and all this. But do you see any movement on infrastructure investment? I know Trump talked about it, but the reality is, is there an opportunity there maybe?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, the Transportation Committee is actually working on legislation, is my understanding.
Right.
But leadership in the House has indicated to us that it's all hands on deck on the tax reform. So we'll finish out the year on tax reform. I would imagine if you're going to see, and I always say this, if you're going to see something on transportation infrastructure, which I hope we will, I really hope we will, you'll see it probably in the spring, and I'm thinking April, May, which would be good. And the president has talked about moving into the realm of public-private partnerships and providing incentives to engage private entities to come in and help as well. And I mean, we've got some projects in Arizona that we really need to take care of. I mean, we talk about I-11, for instance. We've got a corridor basically kind of outlined that needs to happen. Think of I-10. I think you were there when we accelerated the funding to try to eliminate the scalloped lanes. We were able to eliminate them up to Picacho.
Right.
And so there now you get 3 lanes going each way. But we still have scalloped lanes from Picacho coming into your fair city.
Right. We have some challenges there that we need to get through to get that done.
Yeah, we do. But we need to be working on those.
Right.
And I think that's a great project to work on. We have the I-20 or the State Route 24, which we actually accelerated with some H-pans from Ellsworth Road going out further east. Those are projects that we need to be looking at as well. And those are some for the East Valley that I think are really important to deal with.
We'll watch that. Real briefly, just a couple other things. The speaker, Paul Ryan.
Yeah.
What's your take? How are things going? Is he in any jeopardy with the speakership? I know you're always under fire when you're in a leadership position. You've been in one, I've been in one.
Yeah.
How's he holding up?
He's holding up pretty well, I think. And I think that I just had a nice conversation with him a week ago today where he and I had a nice conversation for a while. I think that he's, I don't think he's in trouble. I think that he is doing his best. And you have to understand we've done some things in the House that the Senate hasn't done. We've got like almost 300 bills I think parked in the Senate right now because of their 60-vote filibuster rule. I would love to see the elimination of that rule and let the American people see how their senators are voting on these bills that we're getting out of the House. So we've got a lot of work done. Everything from Dodd-Frank revisions to CFPB. To some of the immigration issues that we've dealt with. They're just parked there. Cates Law, Grant's Law on the immigration side, they're just sitting in the Senate. And we've got a lot done, and regulatory issues we've done. The number we just received Wednesday was that the regulatory relief that we've enacted has produced $18 billion of economic growth in the economy. And when you see it, 3.1% GDP growth the last quarter. So I think Paul Ryan is, it's a busy job. So I think he's
a challenge.
Yeah, he's doing his best.
Hey, real quickly on the filibuster. In other words, it used to be the filibuster where somebody would read a book for 65 days, but now it's 60 votes to get a bill through.
Right.
That's hard to do.
Well, it is, because when you think about it, we have 52 Republicans. And you've got basically 8 Democrats you got to try to get on every bill, and then not all Republicans agree, so then you have to up it. So guess what that means?
Difficult.
Yeah, very difficult and highly unlikely in most instances to get any bill through, which is, President Trump's biggest victory probably is Neil Gorsuch being on the Supreme Court. Well, the only way that they could do that was to suspend that rule.
Yeah.
And a lot of people say, well, don't you need 60? No, you only need 51 votes to suspend the 60-vote rule. So it's important that go away.
Good. Thanks for coming out today.
Thanks for having me. Good to see you again.
Good. We'll do it again.
Absolutely. Yeah.
I'm Mayor J. Chip Shraney. You've been watching Chandler Inside and Out. Want to thank Congressman Andy Biggs for being in studio today. Until we see you again, take care and be safe.